A $500 million deal teetered on a knife's edge inside the hushed elegance of a private dining suite. On one side of the table, two of the tech world's most cold-blooded deal-makers leaned in with polished confidence. Across from them sat Maya Suzuki, a mysterious Japanese magnate who hadn't spoken a single word of English since her arrival. Her silence was mistaken for fragility, her language dismissed as irrelevant. They exchanged smirks, whispered to each other. They mocked her, subtly certain of their dominance. They thought they held all the cards. What they didn't realize was that someone else was paying close attention, the only person in the room who mattered. The waitress moved unnoticed, blending into the background, and yet she saw everything. Inside Aurelia, one of Manhattan's most elite dining venues, the atmosphere felt so dense with tension it could have been sliced clean through with the silver knives carefully placed beside each plate. Politeness masked the pressure, a fragile facade over corporate brinkmanship. The setting itself was a power move, dark, lustrous mahogany walls, a chandelier dripping crystal light like frozen sorrow, and a panoramic window offering a divine view of the cityscape blinking below. Seated at one end were Richard Sterling and Harry Thorne. Richard, the seasoned CEO of Sterling Innovations, wore his silver hair like a crown meticulously styled and wore a smile that never softened the chill in his sharp blue eyes. His presence reeked of old money and indomitable control. At his side, Harry, his VP of Acquisitions, appeared a slicker, more polished reflection. Sleek suit, wider grin, the same predatory stare. They'd come to seal a landmark acquisition, Suzuki Robotics, a Japanese pioneer in bio-integrated artificial intelligence. And opposite them sat the woman who stood between them and their prize, Maya Suzuki. She wasn't the figure they'd expected. Her last name, inherited from a brief, long-past marriage to an American professor, was her only Western tie. Everything else about her reflected Japanese discipline and poise. Likely in her late 60s, she sat upright, her silver-streaked hair twisted into a refined bun, dressed in simple, dark silk. No jewelry, just a jade ring. Her expression revealed nothing. With her was her assistant Ron Nataya, a younger man whose reserved demeanor mirrored hers perfectly. The moment Maya arrived, the friction began. After polite greetings facilitated by Ron, she had spoken, but not in the English they anticipated. Her voice came soft, lyrical, fluent Japanese, completely opaque to Richard and Harry. Mr. Sterling, Miss Suzuki is grateful for the invitation and your hospitality. Ron translated his English flawless. Richard forced a chuckle. Of course, the pleasure is ours. Please tell her we're honored to host her. As appetizers appeared artful scallops with yuzu foam, Richard tried again. Ms. Suzuki, your innovations in neural interfacing are nothing short of groundbreaking. Paired with our global infrastructure, we believe we could reshape the future. He paused, beaming. Ron leaned toward Maya, spoke quietly in Japanese, and she replied in a brief, composed phrase. Ms. Suzuki recognizes the potential benefits of such a partnership, Ron relayed. If this could be called a conversation, it was painfully stunted. For nearly an hour, the pattern repeated. Richard and Harry unleashed eager monologues, Ron translated in whispers, and Maya returned single-line responses that Ron turned back into polished English. It felt like trying to volley with a wall. Harry, growing irritated, leaned toward Richard, muttering behind a raised hand in a feeble effort at discretion. What is this? Some kind of power move, making us beg through him? Richard's smile twitched, barely masking his growing unease. Stay composed, Harry. It's a cultural thing, hierarchy, formality. We have to play along. Remember, this is a $500 million deal. But it was more than just business. Maya's dark, perceptive eyes tracked their every move. She didn't glance at Ron when he spoke, but watched them directly, steady and unnerving. Occasionally, she'd address them directly, her voice low, melodic, always in Japanese. She'd tilt her head as if genuinely asking a question. Each time Richard and Harry would stare at Ron, caught off guard and unsure. She wonders if you enjoyed your recent trip to the Caribbean. Mr. Sterling Ron would announce, face unreadable. Richard blinked, startled. Yes, it was lovely. Very relaxing. But how did she... And she notes that your company's stock dipped by 2 points today after the earnings preview leaked. Mr. Thorne. Ron's voice was calm, measured, delivering yet another insight that landed like a scalpel. Harry's complexion faded. They were being observed, dissected, and the one wielding the blade was doing so in a language they couldn't grasp. Frustration gave way to a dangerous mix of resentment and ego. In their minds, they were the giants in the room, not her. This was their turf, their restaurant, their negotiation, and yet somehow they were the ones being outplayed. Chloe tightened the crisp apron at her waist, her movements fluid and silent as she glided along the edges of the lavish private dining space. She had mastered the art of being unseen in places like this, trained to anticipate, respond, and vanish. Refill a glass the second it dipped below the halfway mark. Remove plates with the grace of a whisper. Serve with the presence of hands, not humanity. That was the unspoken code. But Chloe had never been just a server. She was an observer, always had been. It was how she made it through both long nights at Aurelia and the harder truths of the world. She noticed the tremble in Harry Thorne's hand as he reached for his wineglass, a signal of irritation he likely thought hidden. She registered how Richard Sterling's friendly expression clung to his face like cheap wallpaper, brittle and barely covering the tension underneath. But it was Maya Suzuki whom Chloe watched the most. To the executives across the table, Maya was an obstacle, strange, unreadable, foreign. But to Chloe, she was something entirely different. She felt familiar. Chloe had spent her childhood in Kyoto, raised by a soft-spoken father who worked as a cultural liaison for the U.S. Embassy, a man who fell in love with Japan and brought up his daughter immersed in its rhythms. She had attended a local school, traded secrets in fluent Japanese with her best friend Aiko, scraped her knees on the same playgrounds, laughed and cried in the same language. Japanese wasn't just something she'd learned, it was part of her emotional blueprint, the tongue of first heartbreaks and quiet joy. Sometimes she still dreamt in it. Now juggling 2 jobs while pushing through an arts degree at NYU, those memories felt like another life. Here she was, only the help, just Chloe, the black waitress with good posture and a quiet smile. No one in this room had any clue that she understood every word Maya Suzuki spoke, and what she heard chilled her. Ron Nataya's translations were technically correct, but they were hollow, stripped of nuance, stripped of power. His words lacked the elegance, the coded layers, the finely tuned respect woven into every syllable Maya used. When she asked about Richard's vacation, the phrasing didn't come off as idle chatter. It was precise, almost clinical. A subtle remark that hinted, "I'm aware of what you were really doing on that trip." And when she mentioned Harry's stock dip, the expression she chose wasn't neutral. It carried a quiet reproach, the kind a mentor might give to a student who had stumbled over something basic. She was speaking in a rare, regal dialect of Japanese formal intellectual commanding. Chloe watched Harry, frustration mounting, pivot to a crude new strategy. He slowed his speech, raised his voice as if Maya were not only foreign, but foolish. "Very good price," he said, pinching his fingers together in a mock gesture of money. "Lots of money." Chloe winced. The insult landed like a slap, veiled in ignorance, soaked in arrogance. For a moment she thought she saw something flicker in Maya's eyes, not fury, but a deep and ancient weariness. Ron's jaw tensed slightly, but he said nothing. Instead, he offered a careful translation. Maya replied, her voice still calm, but now with an edge, a hidden blade. Ron delivered the message, "Ms. Suzuki understands the financial offer." But that wasn't what she'd said. What she'd really said was, "Please tell this child that the buzzing of a fly is more disruptive to my thoughts than his shouting." Chloe nearly fumbled the silver pitcher she was carrying, gripping it tightly as her heart slammed against her ribs. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a slow-moving collapse. These men were unraveling a $500 million deal with every smug word that left their mouths. and Maya was letting it happen. She sat there collecting their condescension like dust on silk, her silence speaking louder than their entire performance. The final blow came when Richard convinced the woman across from him was either incompetent or playing games decided to speak freely, as if she couldn't possibly understand. "Look, this is a dead end," he muttered to Harry, leaning forward as though Maya and Ron weren't even present. "Let's just move to the final number. We'll cut the performance bonuses for her execs. Clearly she's not leading them if this is how she negotiates. We can fold them into our own chain and shave 20 million off the top. She won't even notice. Just spin it as a streamlined proposal." Harry grinned, showing teeth. "Genius. She's totally checked out. He'll translate whatever we hand him." Chloe stood stiff near the service door, the cold metal handle digging into her spine. They were planning to deceive her right in front of her, cloaked in the very language Chloe had once used to whisper secrets under sakura trees. They assumed that lacking English meant lacking intelligence, that foreignness was weakness. They didn't see the strategist across from them, only a woman. They didn't see a visionary, just someone not from here. And at that moment, something in Chloe stirred. 15 years of Kyoto rose up like a tide. She remembered her father's lessons. Silence wasn't surrender. In Japan, it could mean thoughtfulness, dignity, quiet force, not a gap to be filled with noise. She looked at Maya into that quiet brilliance behind her gaze, and it reminded her of her grandmother sitting in grief after losing her husband, surrounded by people who only saw a lonely widow, never recognizing the iron in her spine. Her manager's warning rang in her ears. "You are invisible, Chloe. Do not speak unless spoken to." It was the golden rule. Break it, and you're out. It meant the rent wouldn't get paid this month. It meant her dream of earning that degree might slip through her fingers for good. But then Chloe heard Maya Suzuki speak again, her voice barely above a whisper, softer than before, and this time it wasn't meant for the men at the table. It was a quiet, aching murmur, almost like she was speaking to no one at all. "Is there no one here who understands?" Chloe's decision came instantly. Her job, her plans, even her future all seemed so small in comparison to the quiet injustice unraveling in that velvet-draped room. She pushed herself off the door, straightened her apron with trembling hands, and stepped forward, her heart pounding loud enough to drown out her thoughts. As she moved toward the table, the entire room seemed to slow the softness of the Persian rug beneath her shoes, grounding every step like a silent act of defiance. The distant clatter of silverware, the muffled hum of city life outside the window, all of it dissolved into background noise. What remained were 4 people caught in a moment that had turned into something much larger than themselves. Richard and Harry didn't notice her at first. They were too wrapped up in their own amusement, smug grins plastered across their faces. Ron Nataya sat slightly hunched, his posture heavy with quiet defeat. Only Maya lifted her eyes, and in them Chloe saw something shift. Just for a moment, the composed stillness cracked. Chloe didn't stop near Richard or Harry, but came to a gentle pause a few feet from Maya's side, careful not to intrude. She inhaled slowly, the artificial chill of the room stinging her lungs. And then, from deep within memory, from a past life, a world away, she bowed. Not the polite nod expected of service staff, but a deep formal bow from the waist. A bow full of reverence, the kind reserved for elders, mentors, those of true significance. The gesture cut through the tension in the room like a blade through silk. Richard and Harry snapped to attention, their conversation halting as they stared in confusion. "What the hell is this?" Harry muttered, curling his lip in a half-laugh. "We getting more wine or—" But his voice trailed off as Chloe straightened and spoke. Her Japanese rang out fluent, elegant, deeply rooted in the Kyoto dialect of her youth. Suzuki-sama, she began using a title that carried almost sacred weight. "Please forgive my intrusion. I am only a humble worker here. But to stay silent and watch this insult unfold would dishonor both this place and myself." Her voice never wavered. "If you would allow me, I can assist." A silence heavier than any she'd ever known fell over the room. Richard and Harry gawked, mouths hanging open. To them, she was the invisible girl who filled water glasses and cleared plates. Nothing more. And now she was fluently speaking the very language they had been stumbling against all night. Ron Nataya's eyes jerked up, shock written plainly across his face. He looked from Chloe to Maya, stunned into stillness. But it was Maya's reaction that truly broke the moment wide open. The wall of calm she had upheld all evening collapsed. Her eyes shimmered, tears swelling without shame, and her lips parted with a soft, broken gasp. It wasn't sorrow. It was the raw, desperate relief of someone who had been silently screaming in a room full of people who couldn't hear her, finally hearing her own language echo back. Her voice, when it came, was laced with emotion, but still carried that inner elegance. You understand, she whispered. You know what's been said, what it means. Chloe nodded, her voice even as adrenaline surged through her. I understand everything, Suzuki-sama, she answered gently. I was raised in Kyoto. I hear not just your words, but your intention. That moment, though it lasted only seconds, flipped the power dynamic completely. Richard and Harry were no longer in charge. They had become the outsiders. They sat watching, unable to grasp the conversation flowing between two women who had found something deeper than negotiation. What the hell is she saying? Richard snapped, his voice sharp with panic. He jabbed a finger toward Chloe. Who even are you? What did you just say to her? What the hell is she saying? Richard barked, his voice, rising, eyes wild with disbelief as he stabbed a finger toward Chloe. His eyes scanned her uniform, her dark skin, her presence at the table. Then his face twisted into something darker. You think just because you can parrot a few foreign words you belong at this table? He sneered, his voice full of venom. You're the help. That's your place. You serve food, you don't sit with people like us. Chloe froze, her heart slamming against her ribs like it wanted out. Her hands trembled in her lap. She turned to Maya, her voice breaking into a panic. I'm so sorry, Suzuki-sama, she whispered, eyes wide. I only wanted to help. I just thought maybe I could speak for you. I wasn't trying to. Enough, Richard snapped, cutting her off like a whip. You've crossed a line. You think you can sit here, what, because you speak a little Japanese? This isn't your place, sweetheart. Not now. Not ever. He turned toward the entrance and shouted, Can someone get the manager in here right now? A moment later, the door swung open and the floor manager stormed in, eyes narrowing the second he spotted Chloe at the table. Chloe, he said tightly, voice low and loaded with fury. What do you think you're doing? She stood abruptly, nearly knocking her chair back, panic painted across her face. I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I swear, sir. I was just... She needed someone to... You are not here to get involved in guests' conversations, he snapped, cutting her off. You're here to serve. You don't speak unless spoken to. We've been over this. His face reddened, lips curling into a warning. Step away from the table right now or you're out. Permanently. But Chloe didn't look at him. Her eyes never left Maya. She was no longer just the girl in the apron. She was something else now, a bridge, a voice that connected everything lost in translation. Maya, her cheeks streaked with tears, now lifted her hand gracefully and motioned toward the empty seat beside her. The gesture was quiet, but it carried the weight of command. She spoke again, this time clearly. Ron, still reeling, finally gathered himself enough to translate, though his voice was reverent. Miss Suzuki would like the young woman to join them at the table. Harry gave a short, incredulous laugh. Join them? She's the waitress. This is insane. But Richard, arrogant as he was, understood power when he felt it shift, and he could feel the current moving against him now. The quiet Japanese woman was no longer a passive figure. She had found her voice, and it had come from the girl they'd ignored all evening. He didn't speak again, his mind already spinning, trying to factor in this sudden, uncontrollable variable. Chloe hesitated only for a heartbeat, then, with a grace she hadn't known she carried, pulled out the chair and sat down. The world as she knew it had turned on its head, and somehow she had landed in its very center. Sitting at the polished table, the weight of the fine linen napkin unfamiliar in her lap, Chloe felt like she had stepped into a story that wasn't supposed to include her. The cut crystal, the ornate flatware, the half-eaten gourmet dishes, they were all symbols of a world she had always served, but never entered. And yet the way Maya looked at her made her feel grounded, like she belonged in this moment for a reason far bigger than herself. Richard and Harry stared, their expressions a mix of disbelief and indignation. Nothing about this fit their definition of how the evening should have gone. "I think we're owed an explanation," Richard said, his voice low and dangerous. He looked to Ron but aimed his glare at Chloe. "What's going on here?" Before Ron could respond, Maya spoke again directly to Chloe in Japanese, her voice steady and imbued with calm command. Chloe listened, nodded, and turned to face the two executives. Her voice was steady and precise. "My name is Chloe," she said. "Ms. Suzuki has asked me to speak on her behalf." She let the words hang there, solid and undeniable. "She believes it is time you understood the full context of this meeting." Ron gave her a slight nod, quiet approval. He knew now that what was needed was more than professional translation. It was human connection. Chloe looked back to Maya, who began to speak once more, but this time not of profits or patents. She spoke of a rainy Tuesday in Tokyo 6 months earlier. She spoke of a black car, a slick road, the scream of brakes, and the quiet, disorienting blur that followed. As Maya's words flowed, Chloe became their vessel, translating not just facts, but the soul behind them. 6 months ago, Chloe began her voice painting the memory into the room's luxury like a shadow on silk. Ms. Suzuki was in a serious accident. She suffered a traumatic brain injury damage specifically to the regions controlling language Broca's and Wernicke's areas. She saw Richard and Harry exchange a glance, doubt flickering between them. Her memory, her intelligence, her extraordinary mind remain untouched. Chloe continued unshaken. She's still the genius who built Suzuki Robotics from the ground up. But the injury triggered a rare form of expressive aphasia. She paused to let it sink in. Under stress, her brain reverts defaults to the earliest language pathways. For her, that's Japanese. The English she learned later in life becomes locked away, unreachable. The harder she tries, the more it slips through her fingers. The weight of the truth settled over the room like a storm cloud, heavy, electrified, undeniable. Maya Suzuki had not come to manipulate or delay. She wasn't maneuvering a power play. She was battling a silent war within her own brilliant mind, fully aware, fully present, yet barricaded from expressing herself in the language her audience demanded. "Why the hell wasn't this disclosed?" Harry blurted, his voice sharp, not with concern, but frustration. "We've been spinning our wheels all night." Maya's gaze turned to steel, and she replied in a single cutting sentence. "Dignity doesn't appear in quarterly earnings." Chloe translated, her voice carrying the same edge Maya's had. Ms. Suzuki didn't want to be defined by her condition. She didn't want pity. She didn't want to be written off as a risk by the company she built from the ground up. Chloe continued translating with precision and pride. To her, this isn't just a sale, it's a passing of the torch. It's her legacy. She needed to know the people she's entrusting it to are men of substance, not just wolves in suits. There was fire behind Chloe's words now because it had been in Maya's words first. She came here tonight to read your hearts, not just your spreadsheets. To see how you react when you don't understand something, because confusion reveals more about a man than comfort ever could. If any part of them had a soul capable of shame, it should have flushed their faces red. Every smirk, every condescending word, every thinly veiled attempt to sideline her, they had all been weighed, and they had failed. But Richard Sterling didn't traffic in remorse. He saw only opportunity, weakness, leverage. He leaned in slowly, the fury gone from his face, replaced with something far slicker, manufactured sympathy. "Miss Suzuki, Maya, that's devastating," he murmured, his voice dripping with false compassion. "We had no idea. Please allow us to extend our sincerest apologies." His eyes gleamed, the predator in him awakening behind the mask. This actually makes everything easier. We can take care of everything for you so you don't have to worry about the burden. He smiled as if offering her a gift. We can fast-track the agreement, handle the legal work ourselves. You should be focusing on your recovery, not wading through performance metrics and contracts. Harry chimed in almost instantly, picking up the act. Exactly. No more stress. We'll draft a preliminary agreement tonight, just something simple to get the process rolling for your benefit, of course. As Chloe translated their words, an icy shiver climbed her spine. On the surface, their words were sweet, almost kind. But behind their eyes, she saw the truth. Predators circling something they thought too weak to fight back. They didn't see a founder or a pioneer. They saw prey. Maya listened, her face once again unreadable. She turned her eyes to Chloe, and in that glance Chloe recognized a familiar sadness, the same glint of quiet disappointment she had seen earlier. The test hadn't ended. It had just entered its most dangerous round. This wasn't dinner anymore. It was war. And somehow Chloe, the waitress, was standing on the battlefield, armed only with the gift of language and a swelling pit of dread. The tension that had briefly lifted when the truth came out now hung heavy again, poisoned with new manipulation. Richard slid a leather folder from his briefcase and placed it firmly in the middle of the table. The sound was soft, but final. "This is our revised offer," he said smoothly. "Much more streamlined, faster payout, full operational transition in our hands. A complete solution just for your peace of mind, Maya." He used her first name again like they were old friends. Chloe's stomach turned at the forced intimacy. She wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't trained for this. She studied light and color and brushstrokes. But as she saw Maya motion toward the document inviting her to look, she knew she had to try. She wasn't just a mouthpiece anymore. She was a line of defense. Chloe picked up the folder. The paper was heavy, expensive, cold in her hands. She flipped through it, scanning the dense clauses, the calculated language. She began reading them aloud in Japanese to Maya, careful and slow. Richard and Harry fidgeted. Clause 7B. Richard interrupted, "Just a standard indemnity." "We can skip it." "Section 12's just about the exec team," Harry added casually. "Nothing that requires deep discussion." They were trying to steer her to limit what she read. But certain phrases snagged her attention. Chloe had spent enough nights proofreading for her diplomat father to know when legal wording was being deliberately obscured. One moment, she said quietly, holding up her hand. She turned to Maya and switched fully into Japanese. "Suzuki-sama, they are trying to skip these sections, but the language here is evasive. Clause 7B is not a typical indemnity. It seems to grant them unilateral authority to renegotiate all of Suzuki Robotics' IP licenses after the merger." She paused, then added, "They could dismantle everything, even sell off your core patents." Maya's eyes narrowed, the movement so subtle it was almost unnoticeable. She gave Chloe a slight nod to continue. "And Section 12, Chloe pressed on her heart, hammering in her chest, is not about redundancy, as claimed. It's a non-compete clause, so broadly written, it would not only prohibit your leadership team from future employment in the field, it would effectively bar you personally from engaging in any related technology ventures for the next decade. What they're attempting here isn't just to purchase your company, it's to purchase your future." Chloe wasn't just interpreting anymore. She was dissecting, defending. Every clause she decoded added weight to her voice and stripped it from theirs. Suddenly, the two men across from her no longer appeared as powerful, just well-dressed opportunists, cloaked in arrogance and greed. Richard shifted in his seat, clearly agitated. "What's the delay?" "What are you telling her?" he snapped. "Just explain it's a standard agreement." Chloe met his stare without flinching. "I'm making sure Ms. Suzuki understands every element of this contract with complete clarity, Mr. Sterling. As I'm sure you'd agree, accuracy is critical in a deal of this scale." The corporate professionalism in her tone, coming from someone they had written off as a server, rendered him momentarily speechless. Maya then asked a question in Japanese, her tone light, almost casual. Chloe translated, "Ms. Suzuki would like clarification regarding the revaluation of the company's R&D division. The original offer had listed it separately at $100 million. In this new version, that line appears to have vanished, absorbed into general assets." Harry waved a hand dismissively. "That's just formatting. The total value's unchanged. Nothing's missing. Don't worry about it." Maya responded again, her words calm but laced with quiet steel. Chloe's voice matched her tone. "Ms. Suzuki says that in her experience, when numbers that significant disappear from view, it's rarely due to formatting." Chloe locked eyes with Harry. "She's asking you to show her the precise line item where the value of her life's research is being represented." A single bead of sweat slid down Harry's temple as he and Richard began frantically thumbing through the pages, the sound of rustling paper filling the room like a warning bell. They hadn't expected pushback, certainly not this surgical precision, and certainly not from Chloe. They'd believed the woman across from them was disabled. They thought the girl beside her was just a mouthpiece. They never imagined either one could dismantle them. Maya sat back entirely composed and lifted her tea for a quiet sip. For the first time all night, a subtle, satisfied smile tugged at the edge of her lips. She wasn't some broken figurehead. She was a tactician, and she had just watched her enemies walk willingly into the snare. Chloe's breath caught in her throat as realization struck. These questions weren't for clarity. Maya already knew every answer. Her injury made English difficult to speak, not to comprehend. She hadn't needed help understanding the contract. She needed help understanding them. She needed someone to witness. Everything that had happened, the hesitation, the language barrier, the polite deference had been part of the sharpest psychological evaluation Chloe had ever seen. And now came the final test. The room had changed completely. The smug scent of corporate confidence had given way to the cold reek of unraveling control. Richard and Harry whispered furiously, flipping pages in vain, the edges of their composure fraying with every second. Their facade was slipping fast. Maya watched them with a cool detachment before turning to Chloe and speaking again. But this time her Japanese was no longer soft or reserved. It was precise, sharp, commanding. This was the voice of a CEO, the voice of a woman who had broken barriers in an industry designed to exclude her. Chloe listened, her spine straightening as each word landed. The instructions were unambiguous. The judgment was final. She turned to Richard and Harry, who fell silent as they caught the look in her eyes. "Gentlemen," Chloe began, her voice carrying the weight of a verdict, "Ms. Suzuki has asked me to deliver her final decision." She paused, letting the silence stretch like a held breath. Her gaze locked first on Richard. "Regarding the omission and concealment of the intellectual property clause, Ms. Suzuki sees this as a blatant attempt to strip her company of its foundation. The patents you attempted to bury are the soul of Suzuki Robotics. Your maneuver she considers not only unethical, but deeply offensive." Richard's face drained of color. Chloe shifted her eyes to Harry. "Regarding the intentionally vague, non-compete language, Ms. Suzuki finds it laughable. The idea that a man who cannot manage his own projections without leaking them would have the authority to decide her post-sale freedom is, in her words, the height of delusion." Harry flinched as if struck. And finally Chloe said, her tone growing colder regarding the convenient disappearance of the R&D division's valuation, "Ms. Suzuki would like you to know that that division is currently developing Project Chimera, a proprietary technology neither of you seem to be aware of. A project with a forecasted market value that eclipses this entire company. Your attempt to acquire it under the radar has been noted." The two men stared in stunned silence, their mouths open but unable to form words. Everything they had tried to control had just collapsed around them. The woman they dismissed had outplayed them completely, and Chloe, the black waitress they had ignored, was the one who'd dealt the final blow. But Maya wasn't finished. She spoke once more, this time only a few words. As she did, Ron Nataya, silent for most of the evening, reached inside his blazer and pulled out a sleek audio recorder. Without a word, he placed it on the table and pressed play. Richard's voice crackled out unmistakable even through the static distortion. Save 20 million off the top. She'll never even know the difference. Then came Harry's voice, gleeful and cruel. Brilliant. She's lost in her own world. The device played their entire whispered scheme, every word of manipulation and deceit, echoing through the opulent dining room like a bell tolling their downfall. When the recording ended, the room was deathly still. Richard sat frozen, his skin ashen, the once silver sheen of his hair suddenly making him look not distinguished but diminished like an old man out of moves and out of time. Harry Thorne stared at the audio recorder as if it had come alive and bared fangs. And then, just when it seemed the room could hold no more astonishment, Maya Suzuki lifted her gaze, her eyes locking onto both Richard and Harry with a piercing steadiness. She leaned forward slightly, her voice emerging soft and raw from disuse, but every syllable carried with it a blade's precision. I believe she said, the light accent in her voice, like the echo of a far-off melody. This negotiation is over. The effect was seismic. It felt like a thunderclap in a cathedral. The mental barrier that had confined her had shattered not through therapy or time, but sheer willpower. Whether it was adrenaline closure or fury, she had forced open the locked room in her mind and stepped through. She rose to her feet with commanding grace, her spine straight as steel. Ron Nataya pulled her chair back with silent reverence. She offered Chloe a slight nod, barely more than a breath of movement, but it carried the weight of profound gratitude and unspoken triumph. Then, without offering Richard or Harry another second of her attention, Maya turned and walked away, leaving behind two broken men, a $500 million deal in ruins and careers that had just been quietly buried beneath the velvet carpet. The click of the dining room door as it shut behind her was to Chloe the loudest sound she'd ever heard. Chloe stood there rooted to the floor in the heart of a room that no longer felt like a sanctuary of luxury, but a mausoleum of destroyed reputations. The silence Maya left in her wake was suffocating, not peaceful. It buzzed in Chloe's ears like static, a piercing reminder that her world had just shifted. The opulence, the scent of roasted duck, the glint of crystal glasses, the sheen of white linen now felt cloying absurd, like the final remnants of a dream collapsing in daylight. Richard and Harry had disappeared in a flurry of panic ghosts, fleeing the scene of their own downfall. They left everything behind their briefcases, pens, that damning contract now lying on the table like a corpse on display. The surge of adrenaline that had carried Chloe through every razor-sharp clause, every translation now drained from her, leaving her hollow, dizzy, and trembling. She reached for the back of the chair where she had sat just minutes ago, her fingers brushing the still warm wood. It was the only thing that grounded her in the moment. Had it really happened? Had she, a black fine arts student balancing two jobs and living off microwave noodles, just gone toe-to-toe with titans of industry and blown up a $1 billion deal? Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, each thump screaming, "What did I just do?" The rule she had lived by since her first shift at Aurelia screamed in her mind like an alarm. You are invisible. You do not speak unless addressed. You do not exist. But tonight, she had spoken. Loudly. She had taken a seat at the table literally and stepped into a role she was never meant to play. And now the price was coming. The service door flew open with a jarring slam, and in stormed Mr. Dubois, her manager face blotchy with fury, mouth twisted with restrained rage. Chloe, he spat her name like venom, his voice low, tight, and far more terrifying than a shout. He didn't need to raise his voice, it cut all the same. Do you have the slightest idea what you've done? Chloe stood frozen, her arms behind her back, posture snapping back to that of a server taught to vanish. Mr. Dubois, I can explain. Explain, he interrupted with a bitter, humorless laugh. Explain how you took it upon yourself to abandon your post. How you sat with a client during a private, high-profile negotiation. His words came fast, venomous. Richard Sterling's chief of staff is on the phone screaming bloody murder. He's threatening lawsuits against you, against us for breach of privacy, misconduct, defamation, God knows what else. He took a step toward her, each footfall muffled but menacing on the lush carpet. Our brand is built on discretion, on silent, impeccable service, and in 10 minutes you may have torched it all. You're fired. Obviously. But that's just the start. You'll be blacklisted across this city so fast you won't be able to scrub dishes in a gas station cafe. Get your things. You're done here. Each word landed like a hammer blow. Chloe felt the world crumble beneath her. Tuition was due in weeks. Rent was already overdue. Her dream of curating galleries, of living a life surrounded by color and meaning, began to dissolve into images of eviction notices, debt collectors, and sleepless nights. She had done the right thing, stood up for truth, and this was her reward, annihilation. She opened her mouth to respond, not even sure what she'd say, when the door clicked open again softly, this time like a whisper. Ron Nataya stepped inside. He didn't raise his voice, but the energy in the room shifted instantly. His tailored suit was immaculate, his movements controlled, but his eyes were cold steel. I believe you're mistaken, Ron said evenly, addressing Mr. Dubois without blinking. Ms. Chloe was not acting of her own accord. She acted under the direct, explicit instruction of my employer, Ms. Maya Suzuki. Mr. Dubois's bravado stuttered. That can't be. She provided a service. Ron continued, stepping forward until Dubois instinctively stepped back, that neither you nor your guests were remotely qualified to deliver clarity, dignity, and respect. Ron's voice remained calm, but it was the calm of a storm about to land. And as for Mr. Sterling, he added, I'd advise him to reconsider his threats. We possess a recording of him and Mr. Thorne conspiring to commit fraud. My next call will be to our legal team. Dubois paled visibly. The name Suzuki suddenly weighed heavier than the entire restaurant's reputation. Ron's gaze shifted from the shaken manager to Chloe. The steel in his eyes softened into something warm, genuine. Miss Suzuki would like to speak with you. She's waiting downstairs. His tone was gentle, almost tender. Then he turned, slightly nodding toward Mr. Dubois. Please arrange to have her personal items delivered to the address I'll provide. She won't be returning. Ron held the door open. Chloe walked past her former manager, his mouth hanging open, words gone, and didn't look back. She stepped into the main dining room where conversations paused mid-sentence, eyes turned toward her. Colleagues whispered behind hands. She wasn't staff anymore. She was legend scandal, a ripple in the fabric. She unfastened her apron, folded it with care, and placed it on the counter like shedding a skin. Then she followed Ron into the crisp night air. Waiting at the curb was a black Rolls-Royce, its engine humming like distant thunder. It wasn't just a car, it was a statement, a door to another life. Ron opened the rear door. Chloe stepped in, still dazed, still breathless. The door closed behind her with a quiet, satisfying thud, sealing her off from the noise of Manhattan. The inside of the vehicle smelled faintly of leather and jasmine. Seated across from her, bathed in the gentle cabin lighting and the glow of passing street lamps, was Maya Suzuki. She looked drained, the lines on her face more pronounced now than they had been back in the restaurant. The strain of the night, the effort it had taken to remain poised to force her mind past the barricade trauma had built, had clearly exacted its price. She leaned her head gently against the plush leather headrest, closing her eyes for a moment, as if reclaiming strength in silence. When she opened them again, they were focused solely on Chloe, filled with a kind of gratitude that seemed to come from the very soul. Silence. Maya began, her voice quiet but steady, each word in English sounding deliberate. Each one costing her a little breath. Is a profoundly lonely place, Chloe. For 6 months I've been drifting inside it. People either yell at me as if I'm incapable, or they talk around me like I don't exist. But tonight, you gave me my voice back, not just because you spoke the language I could understand, but because you listened for what I didn't say. Chloe's throat tightened, her hands twisted nervously in her lap. I don't even know what to say, Ms. Suzuki. I honestly thought I was going to lose my job. I was terrified. I grew up in Kyoto. My dad worked for the embassy. And when I heard them speak to you like that, the way they dismissed you, I couldn't just pretend it wasn't happening. Maya's lips curved into a soft, knowing smile. I know. I saw it in your eyes before you even stood up. I saw you wince when Mr. Thorne raised his voice. I noticed the way your jaw set when Mr. Sterling began plotting. I was watching them, yes, but I was watching you too. She leaned forward slightly, her presence filling the intimate space between them. The accident changed everything. It taught me just how fast the world turns when it senses weakness. The moment people think you've lost something, the predators move in. The company I've built over 4 decades, my legacy, it's exposed now. I need to find someone who can help me protect it. But tell me, how do you trust anyone in a world full of Harrys and Richards? Everyone who approaches me sees either a tragic story or an opportunity. No one sees me. Chloe sat still, heart racing, realizing she wasn't just hearing an explanation, she was being invited into something rare and sacred. I find myself in need of someone with rare integrity. Maya continued, her gaze unblinking. This is not a job for a translator. This is the beginning of a different path. I need someone on my personal team who sees what others don't. Someone who listens beneath the surface, who values principle more than profit. Someone who can walk into a room and understand not just the words being spoken, but the emotions underneath. I need someone to keep me honest, someone who will never be afraid to tell me the truth. She let that linger, allowing Chloe to absorb it. I also run a foundation, she said, her tone shifting, energized. The Suzuki Foundation for Arts and Innovation. It supports 2 things I believe define the future: brilliant young women in engineering and bold new voices in the arts. That's my true legacy. I want you to be part of it. Work alongside me. Help me discover the next generation of makers and thinkers. Travel with me. Be my counsel, my right hand, my anchor. She paused again, and a glint returned to her eyes, the glint that had once built an empire. I know you're a student. Your education will continue. Your tuition at NYU covered. Any graduate program you want anywhere in the world, it will be paid in full. You'll have housing. You'll have a salary that makes rent and debt and fear things of the past. But this isn't just a job, Chloe. It's a life. It's a platform. It's your chance to take the gift you used tonight and use it to change the world. Chloe's thoughts spun wildly. Her rundown apartment, the unpaid rent, the stress that clung to her like smoke. It could all vanish with a few words, but even more than relief, what she felt was meaning, purpose. For the first time, she wasn't being asked to survive, she was being asked to matter. And the size of that offer, the scope of what it represented, terrified her. Why me? She whispered, voice trembling. I'm a waitress. I'm just an art student. I'm nobody. Maya reached across the car and rested her hand lightly on Chloe's. The touch was gentle but grounding. Never say that, Maya said firmly but with warmth. Richard and Harry, they're somebodies. They've got money, reputations, egos that enter a room before they do. They build with numbers, cut deals with smiles. But they don't see. You do. You see people, Chloe. Tonight you saw me when no one else in that room even noticed I was still breathing. That kind of sight, it's not something you learn. It's who you are. And in the world I live in, filled with masks and manipulation, that is a superpower. I don't need another strategist. I need someone who can see. Chloe's eyes filled not from sorrow, but from something deeper, a profound sense of being seen, truly seen for the first time. All the years of shrinking, of watching from the edges, of thinking she didn't matter, they had prepared her for this moment. She drew a shaky breath. The stillness of the car wrapped around her like a second skin. And when she looked at Maya, she didn't see a tech tycoon. She saw a woman who believed in her, a woman holding the door to a future wide open. Yes, Chloe said, her voice steady and filled with emotion. Yes, Ms. Suzuki. I'd be honored. A radiant smile broke across Maya's face. Maya, she corrected gently. From now on, just call me Maya. As she spoke, the car eased away from the curb, gliding effortlessly into the current of the city. Chloe looked out the window at the glittering skyline of Manhattan, the towers glowing like stars pinned to the black velvet sky. Just an hour ago, she'd felt like a tiny, invisible speck, lost in that glittering galaxy. But now, as the Rolls-Royce cruised silently through the streets, she didn't feel small anymore. She felt like someone who had just stepped onto a road only she could walk. And she was ready. What you just heard wasn't merely the tale of a business deal gone sideways. It was a story about the masks we all wear and how easily we dismiss the people we pass every day. It's about the quiet ones, the overlooked, the ones we think we already understand. We see a uniform, a title, a silence, and we fill in the blanks with assumptions. But behind every quiet pair of eyes lies a storm of experience, a strength waiting for the right moment. Maya Suzuki wasn't just a woman with a speech disorder, she was a queen conducting a test. And Chloe wasn't just a server. She was the only one who passed. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of empathy and the unseen potential around us, then please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more real stories that reveal one simple truth. Heroes are everywhere, often hiding in plain sight. Thank you for watching.